let's go through the report that you have to write for your modules in first year and get you some tips about how you can write it, how you can structure it, and show you some examples of reports from the past that I've written and what's good about them and what's not. For your report, you have to write 750 words per brief. You have 2 modules, and each module has 2 briefs. So that's 4 reports. But for each module, you have 1 PDF. So for me, 1 PDF and both reports in there. For Luis and Holly, 1 PDF, both reports in there. 2 reports, 1 PDF, and 1 PDF per lecture, per module. Okay, so let's go through and let me just show you some examples of what a report isn't, and eventually we'll get to what a report is. But to start off right from the beginning, it's a literally report on what you did. What did you do? What techniques did you use? How well did they work? Did you run into any issues? How did you solve those issues? Essentially, you're trying to give the lecturer all the information which they can't get just from looking at the final object. I don't know what techniques you used for UVing. I won't know which techniques you chose to use for your modeling. I won't know how you ran into issues and then had to think and try different stuff and do research and ask in order to solve them. And I don't know what you've learned. Some of you have skills from before the course, some of you don't. If both of those people, the one with and without skills from before, give me an asset that's on the same level, then there's no way of me knowing that one person had to do a lot more learning to get to that level. And thus I can't mark you for all the learning and progress that you've done. In a way, the report helps us give you marks that you deserve. And it also makes it clear if you haven't done much, because you won't be able to say how you've done it. The best way to look at it is a report can give you marks. It's about how you write it to help me give you those marks. At least that's how I think about it when I write them. So let's look at my first year report. Bear in mind, this is 5 years ago, and well, let's just say that it's 5 years ago. So I'm not going to read through it. I'm just going to tell you, this isn't a good report. Not because of what's written, not because of how I've written it. I'm not even sure how I've written it, but it's just a wall of text. It is just a wall of text. It's 1,500 words for the briefs that we had at the time, but it's just a wall of text. You open this up and you don't want to read it. I don't want to read it. I'm not gonna, just to prove to you that this is not a good report. So let's put that to the side. All right, let's look at our year 2 report, one of our year 2 reports. This one's a bit longer, I believe. This is about 2,000 words, 2,500 on just one project, right? And straight away you can see it's different. Straight away you can see it's different. It's broken up. There's loads of pictures, and without even reading a word, I know what this is about. And I know that there's things being explained. I can see that there's progression being shown, and I can see that there's specific techniques that are going to be discussed. It's clear, right? But these pictures aren't just thrown in randomly. They're thrown in to support the writing. So as you read the writing, you learn more about what the pictures are showing. And as you see the picture, you understand better what the writing is saying. Now, as you see, this is quite a long report, and it is from year 2, and you won't have to write anything this in depth, but you can take some tips from this. For example, the way that it's explained is still not excellent, because it's almost like a diary in some parts. It's saying, I started by doing this. During this stage, I did this, blah, blah, blah. Before doing this, I did this. But in spite of that, it's giving you really specific information about what references I looked at, what I thought about them, what I learned from these references. This was a very useful starting point for understanding the way cloth streams from pivots of movement and seams, as well as how it folds on itself from weight and compression. This reference was used while sculpting cloth creases on the character and while doing primary research of clothing. In this short paragraph, I've said that I've done research. I've shown what I've learned from it. I've literally taught the person reading it what I've learned from it. And then I've said how I've used this research. Here I talk about a technique. Detail modeling of almost all pieces of clothing and apparel use the above methods, along with general ZBrush brushes and functions, including smooth brushes, morph targets, and masking. For one of the trinkets, however, I used a method I learned from a talk by Square Enix, which consisted of using custom alphas to mask a model and extract. In my screenshots, I show the brushes I've used, I show some of the effects of the brushes, and I show the custom masking that I'm talking about. The screenshots I'm showing talk directly about the techniques that I'm using. And this entire report does this. Then it goes into some areas that are more relevant to the introduction to computer games art module, because it starts talking about UVing and texturing and things like that. Here in the UVing stage, I talk about how I did the UVs. I talk about why it was necessary for me to use this extra map. I talk about how I split seams and the size of the textures. I talk about how certain things were difficult to model, and I talked about how different games have different methods and requirements from component and map dispersion, which I need to research further. So I'm talking about things I don't know. I'm saying I don't know about this. This is something that I need to keep on reading about. I know what my lacking skill is. I know what I still need to learn. And then I keep talking about texturing and other such things. And then if you have any extra interesting things that you've done that were not necessarily expected, for example, I started trying to learn how to do expressions. I talked about this and I explained how I did it, and I talked about some of the issues. Because the eyelids were modeled open and the mouth had no cage, I was only able to make eyebrow and minor mouth movements. It's almost like an excuse, but it makes sense. You're explaining why you're doing certain things a certain way, etc., etc. Let's move on. Like I said, it was doing a lot of good things, but it was still kind of a diary. It was saying, first I did this, then I did this, then I did this. It was sequential. This is my year 3 report from first semester, right? And here we're a bit back and forth because now we still have these big blocks of text, but we're covering a lot more technical information. This is a very long report. It's 10 pages long, and it's just on one project. Now, it's 10 pages long because it has a lot of pictures. If you took all the pictures away, it would probably be about 3, 4, or 5 max. But here I talk about really specific issues. I learned a lot of new things while I was working on this project, and I also had a lot of issues. So in this report, I talk about all the things I learned, and I talk about the issues that I have, and I talk about the final character. I talk about the new skills that I learned and how I learned them. So Magdalena Della's head texturing presentation was a starting point for getting used to the program, as well as the turning process, which is used in industry, as well as learning a process which is used in industry. A base color and texture is created by modifying the skin face default smart material, which allows various layers, blah, blah, blah. So I'm talking about the process. I'm talking about what I learned. There's a number of detailed layers that follow, and etc., etc. Tutorial is very basic. And the reference I use is less of that, giving details. When picking skin colors, only use hue change, blah, blah, blah. I'm giving instructions now, and I'm giving other information. For the rest of the assets, generally I use da. So this is a bit more of a, during this time I use this. So, you know, sometimes you just need to be that specific in time. Height information combined with paint generator can be used to create da. So notice here, I'm doing statements. I'm doing statements of information. I'm now sharing new information that I have learned. So you're not just telling the lecturer, I did this, then I did this, I followed your tutorial, I did this. I'm literally stating, almost as if I'm teaching. I'm stating information. I'm stating height information combined with paint or generator can be used to create tears or rips in fabric, as well as emphasize material properties. The lever belts have a slight amount of height information on each color layer, simulating the dark patina which forms from oxidization. I'm not saying whilst I was modeling the sword, I textured the wood, and whilst I was texturing the wood, I used... No, none of that. I'm just giving information. They can see from the picture what I'm talking about. I don't need to talk about which part of the character I'm referring to. They can see that in the submission folder. They can see what the character is. And in the very beginning, I explained what the project is, and I'll come back and look at this in a moment. But I'm stating information, and I do this throughout this entire thing. And and the reason I do this is because there's too much to go through. There's too many things that I did on this project, and it's the same with you guys. There's too many things you did, and you only have 750 words. You cannot write a diary. If I wrote this as a diary, it would be 2 paragraphs. It's now just 1. Whoops. The current texture of this is this. I am satisfied with the skin texture realism because of the tone, surface variation, imperfection. The method I used to create it need to be further practiced, and theory behind skin color anatomy be further studied in order to further develop this process. This is self-critique. This is you identifying areas you need to still do. I'm saying what I'm satisfied with and why, and then I'm saying why I'm not satisfied with and what more I need to do. There are, however, issues in the texture of the skin where there is sharper than preferred geometry and a lack of detail in the hands, legs, and abdomen. Likeness studies of real people, especially primary reference taken myself, would help me practice sculpting and texturing processes of face and clothing, allowing me to improve my appearance. I'm saying there's a problem with this model. Doing this in future will help me, right? And then there's some references. Let's go right to the top. How have I started this? The focus of this semester's character project has been on anatomical modeling, creating garments for Marvelous, blah, blah, blah. What was the focus? And what did I did? The character was also developed in Unreal Anim Dynamics with this feature, which are used to create dynamic creative bodies. What is my project focused on? What am I doing and what have I used? What is new that I've used? Because this is probably the third or fourth character that I had done, so I didn't need to repeat myself. Throughout the project, there have been various design particular challenges. I'm giving an introduction into how the project generally went. I had challenges, I did a lot of research into these indigenous tropical people and elderly male physiology. The character was initially following concept. I'm giving bits of information about the project's initial start, right? Now, let's stop looking at this one because it is quite wordy, it is quite long, and it's quite complex. And it's too much for you guys because you're not doing that yet. And let's move on to one that's even more wordy and complex. But still, it's a nice thing to look at because this is probably the most well-optimized, concise, and clear report that I've done. And it's been a while since I've done it. And the issue is that I don't even remember if I finished it in time because it was very close to submission, this one. And actually it could have been a bit better. You can see there's missing images, etc. But this format of concise introduction, what you did and what you used, and then you can even break it up into sections. So I broke mine when I was working on this character, I broke it up into anatomy and research and clothing modeling because those were the focus areas of my project. The focus areas of your project are research, modeling, UVing, texturing, Unity, right? You don't have to make these headings, you don't have the space, you only have 750 words. But this method of giving pictures and then writing about the area that you want to write, or writing about the area you want to write, and then supporting what you've written with pictures is useful. Now, that was all a lot of different information, and you're possibly even more confused than you were before. But generally, the report is just that. It's just you conveying your progress, helping me see things that you've done that I won't see from your submission, telling me about the learning that you've done, showing me screenshots of methods you used and are explaining, and essentially helping me give you a mark, right? Think of it that way. Think of it this way. You are almost telling your lecturer what to mark you on. You're saying, here are the things I've done. I've done all of this. I learned all of this. Even if I've taught you it, you can say that I've taught you it. You can say this lecture showed this method, which worked a lot better than the method I used before. And I'm just saying this generally. You would specify what method you're talking about, like taking a model and giving it a planar UV map and then a camera-based UV map was a lot easier to see, made it a lot easier to see in the UV editor what I was actually working on, as opposed to just giving it a planar map and then trying to figure out what I'm actually selecting. This sped up UV modeling considerably, and I was able to go through that a lot quicker. You just told me a bunch of information about your UV modeling. Through that, I can understand that you followed the process. I can probably see that in your model, as a result. And you can tell me further, and you can even specify further by saying that selecting and cutting edges happened much more easily as a result, right? So now you've also told me that you've selected and cut edges. You can tell me what was still difficult. You can say, nonetheless, complex objects were difficult to do this way, so I need to find another method which is more useful for objects that are more complex and have a lot of edges. Or you can say, I found a different method which was more useful for this, etc., etc., etc. This is me just giving you an example of how you can talk about a subject, and I'm being quite concise. I'm literally stating. It's almost like you're teaching, but you're not teaching. You're giving evidence. If you've done something new that you were not taught, you would in a way be teaching, because you're showing, you're sharing the knowledge, and that way you're saying, I use this method was useful because of this, blah blah blah. It's just that if it's a method I've taught you, I already know that, and it's more about you just making sure you convey how you used it. Now, I think there's just a few more things to go through. Tell me about difficulties you had. If you feel like you're behind, if you feel like you're finding Maya really difficult, if you had ran into some big issue, if you had errors, right? All of this stuff, this is still valid progression if you then went and did something about it. You can state in your report, and you should, there was significant difficulty in this aspect. It was difficult because XXX. Even if that X is you saying, it was difficult because I found it difficult because I couldn't understand how this aspect of modeling worked, or I didn't know about these features. And then you can follow that up with using, after I learned about, or after I started using this was made considerably easier because, etc., etc., etc. Or to solve this problem, I researched this, or to solve this problem, I reached out and asked what were better ways to do X and Y. What were better ways to do X and Y? I then, as a result, I started using a method called whatever, and the result was better, or whatever, right? You can talk about how you solved problems. You can talk about your difficulty, and even if you did not solve the problems, or you're aware of something that you are lacking, you can say, you can reflect, and this is what reflection means. You've probably heard it a million times in college, and you had no idea what it means. Reflection is when you look on the thing that you have made, and you judge it, and you look back, you reflect on what has happened, and you give opinion or understanding of what has happened. The project is lacking this. My UVs are not good. Blah, blah, blah. This is not good. And then say why. Why are your UVs not good? The model's texture isn't as good as it can be because the UVs had these issues. In future, to avoid this, I need to have my UVs be like this. I need to use this method. I need to do blah, blah, blah. Identify the things that you need to do in future to improve. You are then showing understanding. You're showing awareness of the processes. Even if your work did not show the processes and did not show the thing that you are able to do, but perhaps did not learn or understand yet, if you show that you have understanding that those processes exist and you need to learn them, and even more, if you show understanding of how to do them, but acknowledge that you have not yet done them, that is something that you can be awarded for because you're showing understanding. If your model had bad UVs and bad texture as a result, and you did not tell me any of that and didn't show me any of your understanding in your report, then I would just assume that you have no idea how to do it, or you didn't pay attention to the lectures, you didn't watch the video. I've given you all the content, right? I'll just assume you didn't watch it. It reflects badly because it's essentially me seeing this and thinking, well, you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know this. It shows me that you don't know this, right? If you haven't done it, but you show me that you know it through a report, then that's better. Okay, so I'm going to stop being intense. I think that's the main part, though. It is a report on your progress. Use pictures, tell me about your challenges, and send me messages if you want any further advice, and I'll see what I can do. Okay? Thanks a lot. I hope that helped. Have a good one.